We've already discussed database tables, so we're going to move on to other topics in relational databases. In this short video, we're going to discuss relations and queries. So let's get started. Just as a reminder, we've already established that a table is generally used to store information about an entity, which is meant to be a representation of something, some real or conceptual thing that we want to track. And then in the last video, I made a claim without any evidence for it being true. I said, using tables lets us help reduce redundancy. We don't have to repeat information about one entity in more than one table. Well, how does that work exactly? We can start by posing a scenario in which we need to represent more than one entity, and that means we need more than one table. So what do we do then? Suppose we have a table of NUS students and we have a table of NUS modules. If we want to consider how to represent student enrollment, well, we'll need information from both of those tables. We'll somehow need to connect those tables. We'll need to be able to link information in the table of students to information in the table of modules. If we think about this relationship for a bit, we know that one student can enroll in more than one module, and one module can enroll more than one student. The link between these tables, which is here, that link, which we'll use to describe enrollment, is what we might call a many-to-many relationship, meaning that one module can have many students and one student can enroll in more than one module. The crow's feet at the end of the line here are used to represent that many part. Now, if we're using tables to represent these two entities, and we have a many-to-many relationship between them, like enrollment, then we can add a third table to represent the relationship itself. This third table is called a junction table. Using a junction table means that we only need one-to-many relationships between the two tables on either side and the junction table to represent a many-to-many relationship. A key feature is that the junction table itself only holds the keys from the other tables. These are called foreign keys in the junction table because they're the same identifier that's used as the primary key in the tables on either side of the relationship. If we want more information from the other tables, we can use the shared key between them to get that information. You might ask yourself a question at this point. We established that one entity is represented by one table. So what's the entity represented by our junction table? Using our principles of table design, we know that one record is a single row of a table. In this case, a row of a junction table has two fields, student metric and module code. So a record in this table represents a single student's registration in a single module. If a student registers for 5 modules, that student's metric number will appear in 5 rows of the student to module table, but only once in the student table. If 38 students sign up for a particular module, that module code will appear 38 times in the student to module table, but only once in the modules table, and so on. What we've just established are the basics of relational database design. A database designer will design one table to represent each entity and design relations between them as appropriate. Even in a simple junction table like this, we can see that we don't have to repeat information about students or about modules. The student's metric number, serving as a foreign key, is sufficient to retrieve all the information about a student from the student to modules table and then referencing the student. The same is true of the module code and the modules table. The power of this model comes about because we can query the database to retrieve information about the tables and their relations. And we can do that exactly when and as we need it. And we don't need to keep additional information. We don't need to keep multiple copies of data representing the underlying entities. Suppose a student changes their name. No problem. Change one line in the students table. A module changes the maximum number of students. No problem. The language of relational database queries is called SQL, which stands for Structured Query Language. SQL, often pronounced SQL, makes it easy, or at least possible, to ask questions of complex data spread across multiple tables. And you want to find out all the students enrolled in a module? Well, you can use a query like this one. It joins the students table to the student to modules table using the fact that they share a student metric. Let's make this a bit less abstract. I've created a little database to simulate module registration. I used actual NUS modules in the Faculty of Science, and I generated 4 cohorts of fake students spread across majors within the faculty. Then I signed up students for modules, not quite randomly, but not quite properly either. I didn't check module prerequisites, for example. Let's take a look at this database. Okay, so I've logged into this database, which is the student enrollment database, and I can say, ask, let's find all the entries from the students table. And here it is. They come out and they're just fake names that I generated, but each has a matric number and a first name, last name, gender, major, and year. We can do the same for the modules table. And there are those modules. We can do the same for the other table, but let's not do that. We can also ask for a count. So let's say, how many modules do we have? We can see 292. Let's do the same for students. 3,560 students, and let's do the same for student to module. And there we have over 15,000. That's about 5 modules per student, which is what I was aiming for. Well, I can continue to type in this, but it's a little tedious and it's a little ugly. So I'm going to switch to a program that I wrote in Python to ask questions about this data. Okay, so here it is. Remember, we only have 3 tables, and I'm showing those tables here. Let me stress that this example is meant to demonstrate the ideas behind relational databases and maybe the surprising power and flexibility that you can get from even simple relational databases. It's not about programming. For students taking LSM 2241, you don't need to know any programming to succeed in this module. You don't need to know Python, and you don't need to know SQL. Of course, if you are interested in programming and you want to see how I did this, I'll post the actual code for any of you who want to access and try it out for yourself. If you are familiar with Python, say you've taken a computational thinking module or taken CS1010S, you may recognize the syntax and some functions. Just also for completeness, I'm using a tool called Jupyter Notebook, and that lets me embed Python code in an electronic notebook within my web browser. So this is actually my web browser, and see the results. Okay, so here we are. Let's take a look at this. So here we see the 3 tables, the students, the modules, and this junction table between them. And we can get started. This is Python, so here we're going to get started. We can connect to the database. Here I have to provide a password. And we can look at the whole modules table, but here I'm just going to look at 10 random records from the modules table. And what I've done is, this is a little SQL, select everything from the modules table, randomize the order, and let's limit ourselves to 10 of these. This is the SQL part, and this wrapper is the Python part that is connected to our database. And we see here some 10 modules, and I can rerun this, and every time I rerun this, I'm going to see 10 random modules. It shows how many students are able to sign up for those modules, what level they are, what program they're associated with. We can do the same for the students, but this is not quite the same, because here the random selection is from the Python code. So the Python, again, this is, you don't need to know coding, but if you are interested in coding, I did want to illustrate the flexibility of this. You can do it from the Python code or from the SQL, and there may be reasons to do one or the other. So here I have 10 students, and you'll see the student names are just made up from a database of, actually they're American names because that's the system I was using, roughly equal between female and male and distributed over all the majors. There's an occasional other or undefined gender as well. Okay, so now we've seen the students table, we've seen the modules table. Let's define a function to query students enrolled in a module. And the way we do this is we're going to use that relation that we have up here. We're going to join the students to the student to module table using the fact that they share a student metric key, and then we're going to restrict ourselves to the module code that we take from the student to modules table. So this is mostly SQL, and within this SQL, we're going to pick the enrolled students and we supply the module code as a parameter. And here we can look at the students enrolled in LSM 2241. We can sample 10 of those, and we see here 10 students. Most of them are LSM students because of the way that I generated this data. And we can see occasional non-LSM students. So there we have the students, and we can do a similar function to find the modules that a student has registered for. And here I've picked one of the students in LSM 2241, and we can see the modules that they've registered for. So that's the basic idea. We get a lot of flexibility, but we're only using those 3 tables and the relationships between them. One complication is that modules aren't offered every semester. They aren't offered every term. There's actually, if we think about it, there's going to be a many-to-many relationship between modules and terms, because one module might be offered in multiple terms, and of course, every term offers many modules. And in practice, we're going to need to restrict registration to available modules. One might solve this problem in multiple ways, just using what we've already discussed. We might use a junction table here for the available module offerings between modules and terms, and we might do a query on that. We can imagine connecting students to this junction table for module registration and then querying the modules to find more information about it. Another approach would be to store the results of a query, to query just the modules that are available for this semester, for this term, and to think of it as a table. The results of that query as a table, sort of a virtual table. This is a universal feature of relational databases. It's called a view, and it makes something that looks like a table, acts like a table. You can use it as a table, but it's really a virtual table that's the result of a query. So at this point, we have most of the essential pieces of relational database design. Relational databases are designed using these tools: tables, relations, normalization, which isn't a separate feature, but it's a process of reducing redundancy, designing these tables to reduce redundancy, queries to access data, views to keep those queries around, and so on. So we might, for example, have a look at this problem of students and modules, and then notice that we need to restrict ourselves to available modules, and then we might solve that problem one of a number of ways. But for example, we might solve it by replacing the modules table in our query with the mounted modules, which we derive from a view, a virtual table. That's a bit of the abstract with our little toy system, and the underlying systems are called Relational Database Management Systems, RDBMSs, and they are systems we can sometimes buy, or sometimes they're available for free and open source, and they provide the storage. They provide the way to store and define relations between data tables. They all provide SQL implementations to allow for queries and views. They provide views of the data that look like tables and so on. All of these are often called SQL databases because of the common structured query language. Okay, this is a bioinformatics class. So what about bioinformatics? In truth, virtually all, not quite all, but the vast majority of the common systems we use when we go to the web for biological or bioinformatics data are backed by databases. And most of them are relational databases. When we go to a website, we see a user interface. That user interface provides access, it provides features. Those are really useful. They're certainly designed for the end user, but as bioinformaticists, we might have a problem that goes beyond those features. We might have a problem that requires us to go right to the data. Well, happily, many of those widely used bioinformatics systems allow for that. They actually allow for relational database access. Let's take a look at one of those so you can see not just a little toy system, but a really widely used system, and that system is called Ensemble. So here we are in Ensemble. Ensemble provides data about genomes, genome assemblies, genome annotations, features, and so on. Amazing level of detail from a very high level, sort of a bird's eye view, down to individual base pairs anywhere on the genome. So this is the human genome seen in Ensemble, in the Ensemble application, which is in a browser. And we see the data as chromosomes, but we can drill into the data. So let's drill into, say, chromosome 8, and we'll drill right into that, and we'll see a high-level view of chromosome 8. So here's chromosome 8, And we can see this. Here's a little bit about the features of it, and we can drill right into that, say here, and now we'll see a little bit more details. This is a region of chromosome 8. Here's the actual chromosome 8, the whole thing up on the top. And this red box is what we're looking at right now, or what we will be looking at as soon as this loads. We can dive into that in a little bit more detail if we want. Let's take a look at this region here, jump to that region, and let's look at the details of that. Now we're going to see lots of details of features in the genome on this particular stretch of chromosome 8. And it's taking some time to load because there is so much information there, but it's actually a very small region of the overall genome. No matter, you can tell that we do have, that Ensembl provides a tremendous amount of detail. We're just looking at the very, very tip of what Ensembl provides. And if we want to look a little bit at the underlying database, we can do that. We can look at the schema itself. So these are the tables for the Ensembl core system. There are actually 77 tables here. In this setting, they're organized into 6 groups of tables. You might think, okay, well, that's a lot of tables. How are they linked? We can actually see that. So we can look here at the actual diagram. And now we see some of those tables. These are the same groups. Okay, so external references here is in this blue color, and we can see here are the external references, and we can see the primary key, this cross-ref, biotype, synonyms, cross-refs, unmapped reason, so on. Here's some fundamental tables. Everything here is linked, and there's lots of relations between those two. You can see things that look like junction tables here. Other things maybe that look like junction tables, gene attribute junction table. Keep going down here, more and more tables, relations between them, or just tabulated information. Here's one key that gets used in lots and lots and lots of different tables, and so on. So there's a huge amount of information available within the Ensembl system, and if you have access to the underlying diagram that describes the entities and the relationships, and you can query that data, you can you have much more flexibility in terms of how to access and utilize the data that's available, more than is possibly easy to access within the end user interface. Okay, well, what's true for Ensembl is actually true for many other systems. Many other systems are organized as relational databases, and many other systems are accessible as relational databases. So we have finished our brief review of relational databases. In the next video, we're going to look beyond SQL briefly at what are called NoSQL databases and flat file systems, the 2 other types of systems that are widely used for bioinformatics data at this level. See you then.